Good morning. We'll cover two Harvard Business Review articles. First one's called Why Cybersecurity So Hard by Michael Daniel, and Your Company Needs a Communication Plan for Data Breaches by Holly Aurelio and Peter Tran. I'm Dr. Datta, and we'll talk a little bit about these two articles. Cybersecurity is difficult because oftentimes people think that cybersecurity is purely in the realms of one thing or another. There are three reasons why cybersecurity is difficult, or as follows. Firstly, cybersecurity is never a technical problem. People who think that it's just a technical problem it's like looking at cybersecurity like looking at an iceberg. You don't see what's beneath the water. You only see what's on top of the water, and you think what's top on the water is just the same as what's beneath the water. So it is not a technical problem. It's just a small part of it is a technical problem, because oftentimes, if you are to think of it, a technology is nothing but it mirrors a process. If the process is wrong, then suddenly the technology is wrong. You can have the worst process and the best technology, the worst process will always win. So it's not just a technical problem, and in order for you to solve it, you first need to think of it as a process re-engineering problem. The second bit is the rules of cyberspace are different from the physical world, which basically means that we're so accustomed to doing things in the physical world, and we think that the way we assume security and physical sense of we placate ourselves with some degree of a physical sense of being and a physical sense of what makes us private, what makes us completely confined, what makes us feel secure. Very different from the sense of security and the idea of security in a cyber world. Third, cybersecurity law, policy, and practice are not yet fully deployed. So, cybersecurity law, policy, and practice are lagging way behind what cybersecurity is all about. So, the internet and innovations are moving faster and faster, and law, which is very bureaucratic, the whole legislative procedure is very bureaucratic, and law still trying to catch up on things that have been in the making for a very long time. You see the same story with cybersecurity law, not only cybersecurity but also economic law regarding bitcoins that also have a tremendous cybersecurity impact. But there's very little law about bitcoins and cryptocurrencies and so forth, blockchains and all that stuff. Firstly, so going back to it's not just a technical problem. So technology is necessary, but not sufficient. So cybersecurity is more than just a technical problem. It incorporates aspects of economics, human psychology, and other disciplines. So it's not just a technical problem, it is an economics problem. That's why cybersecurity is becoming such a big thing. It's no longer single people attacking and just trying to muck around with somebody's cybersecurity defenses. It's large companies. It's turning out to be multi-million, perhaps even billion-dollar industries, nation states, countries themselves practicing cybersecurity is the next line of cyber warfare. So it deals with economics. You're trying to cripple infrastructures, you're trying to cripple economics. There's ransomware, you can gain money, so anytime money is involved, it's no longer a technical problem. Human psychology, just the way where you have psychops or psyops, psychological operations during warfare. You're trying to prey on human psychology, and just the way, during the Second World War, you throw in a lot of pamphlets and a lot of brochures and go over the megaphone talking about how terrible the existing regime is, or how what you're fighting for your country was wrong in when American troops were stationed in were liberating France. They were being bombarded with pamphlets that said the Statue of Liberty is kaput. This is a way to play on human psychology. Same thing here, you're doing confidence tricksters, you're turning into confidence tricksters and so forth. The other disciplines, understanding processes, understanding operations, understanding how we do things. Corporate culture is a huge issue. Corporate culture oftentimes lags, just like state policy or cyber law. Corporate culture oftentimes embodies policies, and corporate policy takes a long time to change, even though the external environment around the corporation is changing, and we're just trying to use technology as a band-aid to fix things. Employee resistance is the other thing, which is we don't really need to change it. We're not going to change the way we do things, and that's always been a big thing in our own lives. So why not use the same bit in companies? You can, because cybersecurity is like defense in your own realm, and you've seen it yourselves that when times are quiet, you don't really care for the military. But when times get tough, when there's an attack, when there's a threat, suddenly the military becomes very important. The same person you'll find who will bemoan why we have military and why we have all these provisions and surveillance and all that stuff will be the same people that during times of crisis will be the first to sign off their own privacy, bring in all surveillance and everything so that they can feel secure and protected. So employee resistance is a tough thing to manage, especially if the corporate culture does not automatically change in order to reflect changing times. And third is employee malice. You've got employees who are disgruntled, or feel something happened to them that was unfair, but because they, to a certain degree, have access to the jewels in the crown, they can truly turn against their own company. And there are many cases like that. The third one is differing rules in cyberspace. Now, our physical world mental models simply don't work in cyberspace the way we, for example, hand a credit card over at a restaurant and then it's processed and returned to us and we sign it merrily and go. You wouldn't really hand over your credit card in cyberspace or over the internet to somebody unless it was secure. But how many times have you thought of, well, is the waiter going to steal my credit card, or is the waitress going to steal my credit card? We typically don't, but because we think like that, we also try to replicate that in the cyberspace or onto the cyberspace. Then there are no physical borders, protection of walls, fences or houses. An infected computer in the safest neighborhood is also vulnerable. So just because you might live in a place that has four walls doesn't mean that your computer that's also in that place has four walls. The minute you're on the internet, you're in open space. So you can have an infected computer, but even though you're in the safest neighborhood, you're vulnerable. The time of attack can be perpetual. Anytime you can be attacked, even when your computer is sleeping or your computer is idle, an attack can be happening. There's no police or FBI jurisdiction that applies. An attack can originate anywhere, anytime. We have suddenly become open in the middle of the whole world. It's not just middle of a community, middle of your street, middle of your city, middle of your town, middle of a country, but in the middle of the whole world. You stand there. If you have a machine that's vulnerable, you stand there at the mercy of every single perpetrator that can lay his or her hands on you or their hands on you, and there's no protection unless you learn to protect yourself properly. So you can't simply assume that just because you're in a very secure space physically, you're also in a secure space virtually. So virtual security and physical security are two very different things. So what's the solution? The solution is learning, firstly, to ensure our security, but also realizing that the best way to understand is not only to deal with their security, but also knowing what to do in case something goes wrong. And the solution is disaster response. So perhaps we should borrow concepts from the disaster response world and divide responsibility in a fluid manner that adapts over time in response to changing circumstances. So it's interesting to understand. Disaster response typically goes into IRP, stands for Incident Response Planning, DRP, Disaster Response Planning, all together moving towards something called Business Continuity Planning, or BCP. So we should learn a little bit on how to do incident response plans, disaster response plans, and business continuity planning. So in disaster response, preparedness and initial response reside at the local level. You have to start figuring out how to be prepared in case a breach happens. How are you protected? What are you protected against? Who do you call? Who do you not call? How do you escalate things from one level to another? If a given incident overwhelms or threatens to overwhelm local responders, then steadily high levels of government can step in. This steadily moving from one level to another is called an escalation procedure. And you must have an escalation procedure. Start at the bottom. This is for your company, not individually. And then go up as you realize that the threat is larger than you imagined. So 3 reasons why cybersecurity is difficult further. Firstly, legal and policy frameworks. We still don't have clear answers to many a question, and you could study these questions as a part of what you're doing. For example, what is the right division of responsibility between governments and private sector in terms of defense? For example, so if you look at the division of responsibility between governments and private sector, you just heard that Equifax had a breach. Now, Equifax breach has compromised many a different individual, including perhaps you and me. Now, if that's happened, a lot of these individuals, because Equifax is a very large credit rating agency, it's quite likely that hundreds of millions of people are registered with it. If that has happened, a lot of these people are also people who are a part of defense, a part of companies like Boeing or Lockheed Martin or any of these labs that do defense work. Could be government contractors. They could even be members of the FBI, CIA, to a certain degree. If somebody could match these identities together, you're suddenly being able to access somebody else's persona altogether. So, what is the right division? Once this happens, who bears what responsibility? What is the responsibility of the private sector? What is the responsibility of the government? Mainly because the government provides the initial policy and infrastructure, and the private sector moves the infrastructure towards implementation. So the backbones may be run by Sprint or AT&T, but then the government creates policies so that these large backbones through which all these data communications flow through work. You really don't know. What standard of care should we expect companies to exercise in handling our detail? So, what level of security should these companies have? Can companies prove that they've had the best security they thought was possible, but at the end of the day they were still broken into? Does that mean that they're devoid of any responsibility now? Does that mean they're liable for some kind of I don't know, some kind of remuneration to individuals who feel that there has been a loss of an economic loss or a hardship because of it, just like we do in with many legal cases? How should regulators approach cybersecurity in their industries? So, how do you create cyber policies for different industries? Now, if you have different cyber policies for different industries, what happens if your company is a part of more than one industry? For example, Google, or example, Amazon. Which cybersecurity regulation do you end up using? What actions are acceptable for governments, companies, and individuals to take, and what actions are not? Yeah, there are different actions you can take. There are different actions you can't take. Everything from creating cross-border conflicts to chasing after people, finding who they are, taking certain actions. Because do you realize, even though if your company were to have been breached physically, you could take a lot of actions, including possibly prosecuting the person, handcuffing the person, even to a certain degree, if you're armed, you could shoot somebody on your property. But in a virtual world, you can't. Even if you wanted to take an action against somebody, an individual, it's no longer, even though they have access to your company, you really can't do like something like you'll try and access their computer and steal their information. So there isn't a quid pro quo, there isn't a capture of life or limb. You have to work this through properly. Who is responsible for software flaws? What happens if there is a software flaw? Is it the software designer? Which basically means, is it the company that sold you the software? Is it the company that implemented the software but implemented it incorrectly? Is it the other operating system on which it's implemented? For example, you might have a good software, but you're running it on maybe Windows operating system or a Mac operating system or a Unix operating system, and the operating system itself has a flaw because of which your software is compromised. Is now Unix to be blamed? Is Windows to be blamed? Is Mac to be blamed? And how do we hold individuals and organizations accountable across international boundaries? So who bears accountability? Because we have different countries, different nations, different parts, different organizations, and we're connected through a channel. This network, these networks are international waters, very much like international waters. Who's finding this information? Who's capturing this information? Who's accountable for this information breach, and who should we hold accountable, and how should it work? Should there be a different United Nations? Should there now be a separate Cybersecurity Defense Council, just the way we have a United Nations Defense Council? North Korea fires a missile and we have sanctions against North Korea. That's in the physical world. But what happens if North Korea lands, creates a massive anti-infrastructure cybersecurity or cyber warfare move? Where do you take it? Do you take it to the United Nations Security Council or somewhere else? So a lot of questions remain unanswered, which means there's a lot of interesting work and research to be done. So what do we do now? Cyber breaches are common. Last week, in September 2017, Equifax had a data breach that lost 130 million social security numbers. The thing is, it took Equifax about 2 to 3 months to realize that the breach had even occurred. The question is, it takes a long time to even know that there's somebody who's invading your privacy and violating your entire structure or entity. But once you know that, what do you do? And data breaches affect brand reputation and require crisis management. It is you are in the middle of a crisis, and you better start using your best crisis management tools to handle it. And central to a crisis management is a communication plan. If you don't control communications proactively, the media and the internet will overwhelm you with irrational doom. And there's this interesting story about a company, a software company, or any company. Suppose it's any company in your neighborhood or any company you go and shop at. What happens if tomorrow you create a concerted psychological warfare where you go on the internet and assume 50 different persona and say that this company is using a software? For example, your local store is using a software where every time you put your chip in, it's actually a flawed software and people can steal your credit card number. Now, perhaps that isn't true at all. But you post this all through the internet and it goes viral and it catches on suddenly. And the company thinks that, well, we know our point of sale systems are fine, why do we care? And they keep mum or be complacent about it and don't proactively react to it. What will happen is this information, if it goes viral, will subtly impact the company's reputation and the company's stocks going to fall. Now, if you're truly a miscreant, you might even use that for economic gain because you know that, all right, this is going to be a knee-jerk reaction. People are going to immediately react to this company and drop its stocks or sell its stocks. Therefore, stock prices are going to drop. When the stock prices drop, you're going to simply amass quite a few stocks because it's going to go up later when they'll realize that this was just a hoax. But it's important to understand you must proactively manage your entire communications before somebody else takes control of you. Remember, in cyberspace, there's no one that really controls information unless you do. So don't let anybody control your destiny or control your information. Control it yourself. So steps in the communication protocol. First, create a breach response team comprising of PR, marketing and technology. It has to be a cross-functional team. Have the PR people, who are also your corporate communications people, so that they know how to word things. Get your marketing people because they know how to talk about your products and how to rethink about um, still making your products and your company maintain its reputation. Their job's going to be brand reputation, PR for communications, marketing for brand reputation, and technology to understand what actually went on. Decide who is best suited to handle the crisis and define each person's or group's role in real time. So, what you could actually do is just create a simple matrix and say these are the different groups, and so suppose PR is one group, the second group is marketing, and then third group is technology. Good to break it into further groups. So who among PR, who's doing what? So you can have all the names of the people involved in this whole set in terms of how you're going to handle your communication protocol. Now talk about what part of communication are you going to do? For example, who's going to be the spokesperson? Who's going to be the one who's going to find out, do the forensics? Who's going to understand what products are affected? How are you going to maintain reputation? And then start saying who's accountable for which set. So you're just creating a matrix and working itself through. So assign a group or a person's role and see what their roles are going to be in real time. With your security team, that's number 3, take inventory of your data assets and potential risks and conduct an impact assessment. So understand what your data assets are. What are the things that are likely to be vulnerable? What are the most critical parts of your infrastructure, of your software, that is truly going to impact your brand reputation? For example, if people can't do a payment, that's going to subtly impact the way you do things. So you would say, all right, our payment systems, which is also nowadays you have to follow some kind of compliance called PCI, which is payment card industry compliance, which means your credit card information and so forth, they have to be managed in a certain way through a third party or independently. So you need to know which parts. Your R&D might be another critical part. So take inventory of your data assets and potential risks and conduct an impact assessment. In the same way we created that matrix, you can also have every data asset linked out here, and then have every risk linked out here. So you'd say for every data asset we have separate types of risks. So it has to be a business-driven view on how security tactics are tied to the way your businessman manages risks. So it has to be a business-driven view, which basically means you can't just think of it as a technology problem. You have to think of it as a business problem, which would therefore translate into if this data asset were to be compromised, how would that therefore impact the way we end up doing business? How will it impact customers? How will it impact our brand credibility? How will it impact how we've positioned ourselves? How will it impact our place within the competitors? How will it reduce our sales? So those are business-driven views. Know what kind of attacks make you most vulnerable, anticipating potential goals of an attack, and running simulations in a working group. Just the way we do military drills, run business drills on cybersecurity because they're very, very important. 4. Determine and document exactly what you're legally obligated to disclose. If you don't know what you're obligated to disclose, call the FBI. Do realize that cyberspace is an international phenomenon. It's not a local phenomenon, which means that your local police has no jurisdiction. The only one that has jurisdiction is the FBI. If dealing with classified information, communicate to defense partners, government, and law enforcement. Else, call the FBI and follow their advice. Go step by step. Don't try and communicate things that you should not have communicated. So the minute you have a breach, call the FBI first and ask them, so what would be the best protocol to communicate this matter? Then they'll say that, all right, we don't know what's happening, so wait a bit till we find out what's going on, or perhaps we want to catch the perpetrators. So hang in there. And now, while you're doing that, get your communications team, which is your PR team, your marketing team and tech team, and operations team possibly, and create a joint mode of incident response planning. How are you going to maintain the whole set, and how are you also going to get your business back into full operations? That's why your operations group is so important, because that's going to be a part of your BCP, or business continuity planning. Number 5, invest in relationships with external security professionals and bloggers and media personnel. Use them as your advocates. So invest in relationships with other people. If you don't communicate things very well, or if you don't manage communications among other people who are likely to overreact, including the media, you haven't communicated properly. So it's your job to handle communication sensitively, but manage it with all these different cybersecurity bloggers and media personnel, and use them as your advocates. Make sure that they are relaying the right information, and they're relaying information about how you're managing your security, rather than just going bonkers about what they think went wrong and making assumptions that may or may not be true. So make certain you have spokespeople who are qualified experts in each of the technical and functional areas of your business, so that they can speak use the proper terms and the proper jargon. Your head of engineering might be best equipped to post a response on a developer site, or a field customer field customer product concerns, while your senior counsel, a risk officer, a customer service executive, or your CSO, chief security officer or chief marketing officer, might be the best person to speak to the media. So know whose job is what, just like the matrix we created previously. Number 6. Next, determine which messages you will reveal when, following your first disclosure right through your final investigation. So you have to know, you can't just flood the entire community with every single bit of information you have. Know how to pace your information release. On your own, in your own boardrooms, or in your own offices, make sure you're following a full timeline of what information to release and when. So a breach unfolds over hours, days, weeks, and months as more facts become available. And you may not want to jump the gun and assume that this is what happened. Wait till the FBI or someone similar, could be a cybersecurity expert or multiple experts, along with your counsel, who's going to tell you the impact or the legal impact on your company. Once they tell you what's happening, then release the information as you are fully transparent of it. Don't take a shot in the dark. You may not be able to wait to disclose information or respond until all facts are known, so discuss with your executive team what the boundary conditions would be for disclosure in each stage. Remember, every time you disclose an information, you're held liable for that disclosure, which basically means that can be brought up in court, just the way you've got these rights and the Miranda stuff. You have to tell them that something can be used against you in court, and some people ought to, and you have to realize that. So anytime you disclose something, that can come to haunt you if you don't disclose it properly, in proper time, and in proper pieces. You'll need to manage your brand's social contract during and after the fact, because your brand reputation will be decided with or without you. So you have to understand that there's a social contract. The minute people trust, and that's the social contract, is trust. The minute they shop with your company or they deal with your company or manage, or there are other vendors or customers that work with your company or um, are central parts to your company's sales or operations, there's a social contract, there's a sense of trust. Depending on the goals of your business and your brand values, it may be in your best interest to advocate with your employees, top influential customers, industry analysts, journalists, broadcast networks, investors, and partners, because they can control your fate. If they feel maligned by what you've done or what you've failed to do, they can react. So manage others' reactions. So a center part of your communications puzzle is managing your own employees' reactions, making sure that employees don't suddenly become conduits who are telling external media things that they don't have complete information about, because to a certain degree they might end up really screwing up the social contract you have. So manage your communications properly. As time passes, communicate what was learned and what was done to improve security as a result. If a breach has taken place, it is fait accompli. It's after the fact, earlier yacht test. But you need to inform your customers in terms of what you're doing to fix the problem so that that's not going to happen again. You have to realize that people realize these are murky waters, but it becomes murkier if they don't feel you're taking the right steps to mitigate the threats. Finally, number 9, don't forget to dust off and revisit your plan often. This is a cycle. This is not a single shot process. As you fix your existing security, hackers will try to break through your system again through social engineering, through psychology, through technology, through a variety of different ways and means. Hackers are constantly trying to stay one step ahead of you, so keep running these different simulations, know what your goals are, know what's at risk, protect things properly, and mainly revisit your plan often and know how to communicate what and when. Thank you, guys.